So I'm going to be talking to you about the history of why cybersecurity is important. I'm going to be talking to you about ways in which you can help protect yourselves. I'm going to be talking about things like the ransomware incidents that have been happening over the last while, ways in which you can protect yourself, some understanding about social engineering and various bits and pieces like that. So I'm also going to not set you some homework, but I'm going to give you some ideas about some exercises you can do within your companies to go away and to think about the data that you've got, how you're securing it, and what you're doing with it. So hopefully that will be useful to you. So as always, you will be aware of the fact that obviously we're using Zoom for this because of whatever's been happening over the last 14 months or so. But we are using Zoom. There are many different ways in which we can communicate here. You can put a message in the chat just saying hello. That's absolutely great. Please feel free to do that. You should also have a reactions section within your Zoom toolbar. So if you click onto reactions, then you can tell me how fabulous I am. You can do thumbs up, you can clap, you can do whatever you want to do. But also if you have any questions, please feel free just to raise your hand. And as soon as I notice it, I'll try and stop and ask you to unmute and have a chat and see what you can find. Okay. So we've got all those different ways in which we can communicate. You can also go do the old-fashioned thing of unmuting yourself and just shouting at me. So please feel free to do any of those things. I thought I might talk at you for about 40 minutes, 45, something like that, and then and then kind of open the floor up to questions and see if anyone's got any bits and pieces they want to raise while we're going through. So we'll try and do that. So as you can see, there's another picture of me just over there. So you now have two pictures of me on the screen, you lucky people. My name is Simon. I have been working in the cybersecurity world since about 2006-07 sort of direction. I was actually just saying there, my career origin, or my origin story, if you want to go all Marvel on it, is that I actually used to work in the theatre. I used to be a stage manager. I went to RADA, to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, to do stage management and theatre production, and graduated from there and came over to Belfast and met a lovely girl and didn't really leave again. But while I was doing that, I realised that theatre wasn't for me, and I managed to get trained up. I did some brilliant Open University courses. I was really kind of privileged to be doing those courses. It was fantastic, and I changed career because I realised that theatre was A, too much like hard work, B, had too many difficult hours, and C, wasn't as well remunerated as some industries. But I decided that it wasn't for me, so I moved into computer programming. And I was privileged enough to work with some of the world's largest companies over the course of the next 5 years or so. I was working with some of the biggest oil and gas companies in the world. We were doing software to help them kind of manage their suppliers. It was really interesting stuff. But nobody cared about security. Security was never mentioned. It was never a thing. It was just like, well, there you go. It'll be fine. And we worked with companies in America. We worked with companies in Europe. We worked with companies in the Middle East. And nothing was ever mentioned around security. And then we started working with a Russian oil and gas company that had done a partnership agreement with BP in Russia. And security was very important to them. They said, have you ever done a penetration test or a security test? And we said, no, but we're really good at this stuff. We're really good developers. We know what we're doing. There's no chance that anything bad is going to happen. About 3 minutes after that, we started eating our words and they started extracting all of the information from our systems. And about 20 minutes after that, they actually stopped the test because it was just outrageous by that point. They'd extracted everything they could from every system and they were able to do whatever the hell they wanted. But for me, that was brilliant because that meant what I could see is how they were doing it. I could see what they were up to and I understood what they were doing. And I found that fascinating. This idea that you could break a computer from remotely. You know, I'd done lots of making. I'd done lots of programming and creating applications. And the idea that this Russian person was just coming in and tearing it to pieces from a remote location was quite soul destroying, but fascinating. So we started getting into this, and that's what we do now. So my job really is, as CEO, is to run Vertical Structure with my colleague Mark. And we do three things really. We do what we call prepare, protect, persist. Okay, and this is from a prepare point of view, we do training. So we help you to understand how to protect yourselves. Okay, so that can be from cybersecurity and social engineering awareness type idea. We also do some hack yourself first type workshops, which are really, really fun. Where you actually get to come in and break things. Also do some AWS courses where we teach people how to actually break their own software. And once you learn how easy it is to break software, you put a little bit more effort into securing it because you can see what's going on. We also do penetration and security testing. That's really good crack as well. We get to destroy things, get to play around. We have a really great group of people whose job it is to break things, and they love it. I think they love it for the most part. We get to break lots of people's applications, web applications, mobile applications, APIs, infrastructure, whatever we can get our sticky little hands onto. We help them to break. And we also do things around ongoing security. So we're aware of the fact that you could be brilliant for 10 days of the year when we come in and do our penetration test, and then on day 11 you set all your passwords to password 01 and you just kind of and it doesn't make any difference. But what we've got here is this opportunity for you to help you think about security from beginning to end, from hiring people to how they get access to your very sensitive data to how they when they depart. We have a template for what we call a rapid lever, which is quite a good euphemism, I think. A rapid lever, not always wanting to be leaving, but there you go. So we have those things in place. So what I want to do is I want to start by thinking about the fundamentals. Okay, let's go back to the beginning and think about the fundamental security concepts. What are the basics that we should be looking at here? Why is security important? Well, we're protecting valuable assets. We're looking after interesting things. You maybe have client data. You maybe have information from all of your organizations or your suppliers or whatever. You will have interesting information. So we need to protect that information. We need to protect it because it's good to protect it, firstly. We need to protect it because you may have regulatory compliance issues, FCA, CBI, those sort of people who are keeping an eye on you, making sure that you're doing what you're meant to do. Financial considerations, you could lose money, plain and simple. And you could also you consider the fact that you could be you're kind of seen as the company who didn't do the right thing from a security perspective. And then we think about what could happen as well. So what could happen? Well, plain and simple, you could have money stolen from you and your clients. You could have your systems compromised. How would you start again if you had to? How would you start from the beginning with all of your documents, with all of your web applications that you might use? How would you start from a clean slate? Some of you will be creating applications. Intellectual property might be stolen. You might have interesting information available to people. It could be from that perspective. You could also lose credibility and therefore business, and could take years of effort sometimes to rebuild the brand. And let's look at some of these breaches. Let's look at some of these breaches here. And if we look back towards 2015, back here, you can see they're relatively big. There's a Equifax up here, which is quite an interesting one to look at because they got well and truly popped. Lots of social security numbers and things like that. We've got these ones, and as we get to this date here, this starts to become really quite interesting to us. And normally I'd ask you to unmute, but with this amount of people on, I'm not going to do that. But there's a date around in 2018 where these breaches start to become really quite interesting, and companies start to care a little more. And it's to do with May 2018. And that's when the Data Protection Act came into effect in the UK, in Ireland, and it was the enactment of the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. Before this, fines were fines. They were pretty small. They were generally not too much of a hassle, and companies would just be all right. And then with the Data Protection Act coming into play, the 2018 version in the UK and in Ireland, then things start to get a bit more serious. So we've got this breach here, the British Airways one and the Marriott one. These were both headline-grabbing ones from the ICO. The Information Commissioner's Office in the UK deemed that these organisations should originally be fined, I think it was 100 and 150 million pounds, respectively. Now that's a lot of money. Any company, that is a lot of money. That's a lot of cash going out of the door. Those fines were, the advisement of those fines were later reduced to a measly 20 and 25 million pounds, which was announced during the pandemic last year, which for two companies in the hospitality and travel sector probably was a little bit of hassle for them to sort out. It's not good. So what we can see is that actually these matter. It's not just a case of a little bit of cash going missing, someone's credit card number gets stolen and they lose £1,000 and it gets sorted out by the credit card companies or whatever. Actually now this matters. These organizations got fined, and they got fined considerably. And let's have a look back at some of these security breaches through the ages. So if we go back to 2013, 40 million customer records stolen. This isn't a new thing. This has been going on for a while. If we think about the internet being, a new fad or whatever we want to call it, actually Target getting popped back in 2013 with 40 million customer records. That's a lot of users. Neiman Marcus, 2013, millions impacted. Home Depot, 56 million. JP Morgan Chase. Sony Pictures. I think Sony Pictures is quite an interesting one, because if you go back into Google and you search for Sony Pictures and WikiLeaks, you can read every single email that was sent between Sony Pictures executives and employees from 2010 to 2014. That's everything. That's all of their details, visas for people who are doing a lot of travel, passport copies. There were copies of files called things like passwords.xlsx. And in there were the details of all the social media accounts for Sony Pictures Entertainment. So if you wanted to be Spider-Man for the day, you could be Spider-Man on Twitter, and you were able to do that. Then we've got Ashley Madison. And Ashley Madison is obviously one that some of you may have heard of. Ashley Madison has a tagline of "Life's too short, have an affair." It's a dating site for married people. And one of the reasons why I always bring this up is that I think that with Ashley Madison especially, it's an example of a real life impact of cybercrime. Real life. People, got divorced because of the fact that this information was released. Yes, they were cheating, and yes, they were X, yes, they were, whatever, moralities aside, doesn't matter. What we have here is the fact that a cyber incident resulted in a real life impact. And I think that's really a really interesting. And we're going to see more of that in a second. And then we go through TalkTalk in the UK was a massive, massive thing. 3 days of front page news, lots and lots of big details. OPM in the States, like civil service, human resources, LinkedIn, Yahoo, Dropbox, Equifax, Butlins, Exactis, British Airways. It goes on and on and on. And we'll talk in a second about HSE and Colonial and things like that, just to show us off. And what happens with that data? What happens to that information? Well, it gets sold off to the highest bidder in many cases. These are examples of dark markets. Some of them are dead now. Some of them have been closed. I think Alphabet and I believe WHM has gone now as well. But these are markets where you can go to buy information. You can go buy data about people. And here's some examples. If you want a Booking.com account, there you go, $3. With payment method, $3. Now, I would suggest maybe that going to, booking your family holiday on a stolen Booking.com account is probably not going to be that good an idea. But they use it for laundering money or for, kind of looking at how to, kind of get access to other sites because they have the Booking.com site and things like that. And in here you can see Yahoo, 432 million email addresses and passwords. That's for a very small $250. You can buy access to those 432 million usernames and passwords. What else can we see? Well, this is from a screen grab that we took in mid-December 2020. On here you can see how you can access actual real people's computers. So we limited this, I think, to London. I'm pretty certain we limited it to London. And on here you can see the sort of sites that you can get access to, but from this system. Okay, so you can pay $10 and get access potentially to their online business.lloyds Bank, Oracle Cloud, Live.com, BT.com, Netflix, BBC, Facebook. I mean, it's a who's who of interesting sites. Even if you want nothing more than just be able to watch the the American Office without having to pay for your own subscription. So for $10, that's what people are doing. Okay, and that's pretty that's a pretty big amount of data available for such a small amount of money. And we look at these types of compromise. I'm sure you've seen, give me a thumbs up in the reactions if you've heard of this SolarWinds thing. You may well have come across SolarWinds. SolarWinds is a network monitoring tool which has a lot of internal access to other devices. And it was targeted specifically because of that. It was targeted because it had lots and lots of interesting information. And look at some of the customer listing. Look at, here you go. We've got people like, let's highlight a couple here. U.S. Secret Service, U.S. Department of Defense, U.S. Air Force. I think we see Microsoft in there, National Park Service in the States. There are huge amounts of companies out there using this software. Now, not all of them will have been compromised, and not all of them will have had those issues. And that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that in this instance, there was an attack on a supplier, SolarWinds, with a view to getting access to some of these companies over here. That's what they wanted. They wanted in there. And it happened because a build server was compromised. So the way they built their software was compromised, which allowed attackers to inject nasty stuff into something that was into the code that was then sent to their employees. They also did have another issue, which is quite embarrassing, so really. But turns out that there was a bit of an issue with a password that was located in a GitHub repository in a piece of software, which was SolarWinds 123. So, maybe not the best way of doing it, but that's a by the by. But there are lots and lots of these things happening around the world now. And we'll look at the HSE and the pipeline one in a wee second again. And we've got this idea of hackers. And I think I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't present a picture of a person in a balaclava holding a laptop in a pair of gloves. This is the image of cybercrime. And this person here who can't work out how the Zoom function on their laptop works. And also this person here with the anonymous mask on. But it's not always like that. Yes, there are people who, they put the hoodies on and they do all their stuff and that, they do their hacking and cracking. But actually as well, there's an actual industry around this. There's a cybercrime industry. Crime as a service is a big thing. In many cases, cybercrime teams will look and operate like your company. They'll have development teams, they'll have marketing departments, they'll have customer onboarding, user ticket management. They'll have stand-ups and they'll have a scrum where they say, I've got a firewall over in Belfast I can't get into. Anyone got any information about Juniper firewalls or something like that? You really will find that those are the that's what we'll see. So they are it is a proper industry, and that kind of is headed up here with this kind of talk and this thought from Paul Taylor from UK Head of Cybersecurity for KPMG, as was. In here, he says, and the report says, it's time to think differently about cyber risk. We're going to ditch the talk of hackers, and we're going to focus on ruthless criminal entrepreneurs. RCEs, ruthless criminal entrepreneurs. But what does that mean? Well, it doesn't roll off the tongue as much as well as before. But what it does do is it helps us to think about the fact that we are being targeted by people with really, really extensive resources. And all they want to do is they want fraud, extortion, and theft of hard-won intellectual property. That's what they're after. And let's look at who's behind these breaches as well. Let's think about who's behind these breaches. Well, I think there are two very, very useful figures here to think about. Firstly, 75% perpetrated by outsiders. That means obviously 25% involved internal actors. Oops, we've got to think about those. We think about this organized crime groups. It was 51% at the time of this report. That is only going one way. That is going up. And the final two figures I think are useful are these two. So 62% of breaches featured hacking. And of those 62%, 81% leveraged stolen and or weak passwords. So of the breaches that involved any form of hacking whatsoever, 82% of them were because we have bad passwords. We need to change this. We need to get this sorted out. We need to improve how we're doing this to protect ourselves. Another figure that I think is really useful to be aware of is this one. And yes, it's a slightly older figure, but one of the things that I think is really useful and interesting to think about here is if one of my team, for instance, had access to anyone's network for 210 days, it would be game over. And we're nice people. We do what we're asked to do. But 210 days of free, unfettered access onto a network, and there will be severe consequences. And as we'll see from the ransomware section just in 1 minute, we'll have a think about that. So let's think about this ransomware problem. And we've all been reading about this on the news very recently, I would imagine. We've all been hearing about this very much. Let's think about what it is. What is ransomware? Well, ransomware is malicious software or malware. It's a type of malware that prevents you from accessing your computer files, systems, or networks and demands that you pay a ransom for return of that access. Okay? That's what we're talking about here. They take away your own access to your own files, and they ask you then to pay some money in order that you get access to can get access again to your files, which seems harsh, doesn't it? And what about this? Well, what does this show us? Well, ransomware is spread in a number of different ways. This is one example. You receive an infected link in an email, a decent phishing attack. You visit an infected web page, you have an outdated browser, and then it downloads something, and some nasty things happen. So what can we'll talk about what we can do to prevent that in a bit. But this is quite a standard process flow. But we also see other process flows. We also see the fact that we were working with a client recently whose firewall got breached. They hadn't updated their firewall in 3 years, and it was a Fortinet device, I believe it was, and there was a flaw which had been fixed last year. We see things like Pulse Secure VPN. You may have read about this if you're reading any of the tech journals. Pulse Secure VPN, there was a massive flaw with that last year. There are ways in which you can get in and do some nasty bits and pieces remotely. And that's what we've got to try to solve. What else can we think about? Well, let's think about how it can ruin your day. Okay, so once this is loaded onto your machine, it will lock access to the computer itself or data and files stored there. The more menacing versions will also encrypt files and folders on your local drives, your attached files and networked computers, and worm their way through your system. A lot of the time you don't know your computer's been infected until you get the ransomware payment note coming up. You usually discover it when you can no longer access your data, or you see messages telling you about the attack and demanding your ransom payments. So what can it do? Well, let's have a look. It can encrypt all your data on hard drives and cloud storage services. So what will that mean? Well, obviously if the file is encrypted, it will then be backed up to Dropbox for you. And yes, there are ways in which you can have versions of Dropbox and things like that, but it becomes a difficult thing to restore back sometimes. They could leak your corporate information, or worse, that of your clients. It could be your personal data of your suppliers, of your team members, of your clients. It could be all of your data. You may find that your internal systems become compromised. So it goes from not just a file share worth of data, but also if you have internal systems that haven't been protected, then you can find that they become compromised if you have weak passwords, misconfiguration, and maybe lack of updates. Okay, so that's not a good thing. It can lead to loss of income, investigations, fines, loss of reputation, those sort of things. And what I will tell you is that untested backup and recovery procedures are 10 times more difficult when you're under pressure. So if you don't know how your backups work, let me tell you that one of the best things you can do after this event is to go away and work out what you would do if you no longer had access to your files directly on your machine. How would you restore? But it's the leak of corporate data, which I think is really interesting for us to explore here as well. And if we look at some of these, the ransomware things that have been happening recently, Colonial Pipeline over in the US, a massive issue. They paid the ransom over there. They paid $5 million, of which the FBI got back, I think it was about 3.5-4 million, something like that. They paid the ransom so that they could get the decrypt tool But turns out that the tool wasn't actually quick enough for them to get back up and running as quickly as they needed to. So one of the things I think again is interesting about these two breaches is the real life impacts, as we'll see in a second, and the HSE, resulting in delayed COVID results and vaccinations, regular appointments. We heard from some medics down in the south who say we have nothing. We have no previous data about patients. That's going to have impacts. That is definitely going to have an impact. We also see this, and I had to take a screen grab of this because I didn't believe it myself otherwise. But the US Consumer Product Safety Commission warned people in the States during the Colonial Pipeline issue not to fill plastic bags with gasoline. So don't do that. I mean, hopefully that's plain and clear to all of us. But in an attempt to hoard gasoline because of the fact that the pipeline was down, they were told not to fill them with plastic bags. They were filling petrol up and just keeping it in the back of the car just to be on the safe side. Those are real life, real world impacts. What else can we see? Well, JBS in the news again today. JBS were compromised last week, I think it was. They paid $11 million today for the unlock key. $11 million is what they paid, which is obviously quite a significant amount of money. And JBS are a meat packers. They're the world's largest meat packers. And what they said was that any impact on consumers will depend on how long production is down. They were turning away hauliers who arrived at the plant with animals. And they were saying that if it lingers for multiple days, you will see some food shortage. So that's quite a serious issue. So a ransomware caused potentially the ability for food shortages in certain parts of the world, which is, again, concerning. HSE, for those of you in the south, you'll be more than aware of this. It's been such a massive issue all round, and my heart goes out to the people who are having to fix it. It's a massive, massive issue, and it's really, really hard. Some of the data has been released already. A small amount has been released as a kind of demo to say we've got your data. This has been released. The antidote has been released by the gang for some reason. It's really interesting why. But the antidote has been released, but it's slow and it's going to take a long time to get things back. And they've got to be sure that things are working again in the way that they're meant to. One of the things that we thought was really interesting to do was just to have a look back and see whether this was predicted or not, whether this could be examined. And what we found was in the board statement from 2019, that there were messages about this. Internal audits have identified weaknesses in the area of security controls across parts of the domain, including password management protocols and the management of secure access. That's from 2019. Okay, so there were issues being raised then, and the CIO is committed to improving controls in respect of cybersecurity. Great stuff. That's brilliant. But 2 years ago, that was being talked about. There were questions from the board in the 2020 minutes. In response to board questions, the CIO confirmed that necessary controls and mitigations have been reviewed in light of the warning. So they had examined their necessary controls and mitigations in the course of that year, which is fantastic. But obviously, something went awry, something went wrong. They also, in that time, confirmed that the health service still had 46,000 Windows 7 devices on its network of 58,000 computers. Windows 7 is out of service, it's out of stock, it's out of fashion, shall we say, and we really shouldn't be using it. Now, the HSE had paid for extra security updates to Microsoft. They paid over £1 million, I think it was, over €1 million to keep on getting security updates. But that's a kind of a demonstration of some of the issues faced by the HSE. That they had real problems from that perspective. So I think that's another interesting area. They have such a big real estate that it's almost impossible to get it right, and they were proven to be wanting in this occasion. So what can we do? Well, from a preparation point of view, what we can think about here is training. Be a cautious and conscientious computer user. So think before you click. Don't just click any link that you get saying that your stuff is being going to be turned off unless you click this link. Patching. Make sure you patch all of your systems. Keep your operating systems, software, and applications current and up to date. Okay, so that's what we want to do. We want backups. We want to back up our data regularly, and we want to double check that those backups were completed. Okay, and we want to make sure that we're securing those backups. Make sure they're not connected directly to the computers and networks that they're backing up. We saw a horrible example a while back of a client who had very effective backups, or quite effective backups, we'll say. But unfortunately, they were on a file share running within their office, which was ransomware, including the backups. So they were all gone. They were all lost. What else do we have to do? Well, we have to know, we have to create a continuity plan. Think about what you would do if something were to go wrong. Think about what you would do. From a data perspective, know the data you've got. What data do you have in your network, in your systems, in your applications? When you know what data you've got, you can start to protect it better. Think about your suppliers, especially your managed service providers. I think your suppliers should be close to you. So if you don't have a good relationship with them, work out why. If you're not speaking to them regularly, work out why. If you think about the fact that you would need to phone them on a Monday morning at 3 a.m. and say, we've got a problem here, how can you help? That is the sort of relationship that you should be able to have with your supplier. Okay, so work with them, be friendly with them, work out how you can help one another. Think about doing something like an exercise in a box. For those of you in the UK, in Northern Ireland, or in England, Scotland, and Wales, you can use the exercise in a box service, which is absolutely fantastic. Helps you to plan what you would do were something to happen. And I'd be really interested to put one of these together for Glandor to run a session. So if you'd be interested in doing one of those, a public one, so that you can all share, then please do let me know. I'd be really interested in sorting those things out. If we were all together, I would be offering you a sticker here. I hope you can see that with the blur on. I would be offering you a sticker. The sticker says a backup isn't a backup until it's tested. I have that as kind of a mantra, and I think it's really important for everybody to be aware of. So look at your backups. Think about how you would restore them if everything were to go horribly wrong. Think about what you would do. And also, let's think about what we would do, or what we should not do if something goes wrong. So if you do get impacted by ransomware, what would you do? What should you do, or what should you not do? Well, first thing not to do is don't panic, okay? Don't be like the scared fire extinguisher we see in front of us here. Don't panic. And also don't put your head in the sand. This problem isn't going to go away by hoping or praying or thoughts and prayers or whatever it is. You have to do something about it. You have to consider your next steps. You've got to go through and work out what to do. Don't delete the evidence. You might not be an IT expert. You might not be the IT people. But one of the most important things we can say is that it is really, really important to be able to understand where the breach took place. If you don't know where the breach took place, you could end up in a situation where you have your stuff ransomwared. You restore your backups back up. It takes you 3 or 4 days to get back up and running. You think you're all well and good, and then suddenly it happens all over again, because you actually hadn't considered where the issue had happened. We nearly had this happen with a client a while back, where we were helping them out, and we identified that actually the firewall was the point of ingress. The firewall itself. They thought it was a bad password. They thought it was remote desktop protocol. Actually, it was an unpatched firewall. So you're not the expert here, but it is your responsibility to be aware of this. So don't just delete everything and start from scratch. Don't start the rebuild until you know what happened. So don't be building on a bed of sand. You could be rebuilding to let it all happen all over again. You should maybe even consider rebuilding into a fresh environment. Some of the things we've seen around Colonial and various other ransomware issues in the States are that they start from the very beginning, and then they have a green network and a red network. And when they're happy, they move things over from red to green, but only when they're completely happy, and in very rare cases. Then there's a question about to pay or not to pay. Now, official guidance from people is not to pay, from government agencies, from the FBI, from all of these, from the White House. The official guidance is not to pay. My thoughts on this, it's very, very complex. My advice is always to speak to either your insurance or to a lawyer about this. If you make a payment, you could be funding terrorism, or you could be funding crime, or there's various different pieces of legislation you could be breaching. I was actually doing a presentation with a lawyer earlier on, and one of the things she said was that there's almost like a know your customer thing for these crime gangs. So you assess whether they're the bad guys or the really, really bad guys, and you can pay the bad guys, but you can't pay the really, really bad guys. Okay, so you have to consider that, and don't just pay up straight away. Speak to your insurance company if you have one. Speak to your lawyer if you don't. They will keep you right, but don't just pay up. You've got to consider what happens. I actually saw a great quote from the guy who used to run the National Cybersecurity Centre in the UK. And one of the things he said is that we actually have an environment for cyber criminals at the moment, a positive environment for cyber criminals at the moment. And this is something we have to change. But it's difficult to do that when you need your data back straight away. So have some people at the end of the phone. So what should you do when something happens? What do you need to do? Well, the first thing is be prepared. So be ready for this. So be aware of the fact that you're going to that this might happen. So run the things like the exercise in a box. We can help you run those if you want to do them privately. Think about those things. Think about how you would respond if something were to happen. How would you identify that a breach has happened? What would you do? This is an important stage in your breach recovery, is to identify it happening in its first place. How would you contain it? Well, what does it mean by containment? Well, it means stopping it spreading any further. There were tweets coming out from the HSE a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, I think it was, last week maybe, which said things like, please, if you have an HSE computer, please turn it off straight away. Because they didn't want this to get any further out into the world, which is a good idea, obviously. Eradication. So we want to eradicate where the issue came from. We've got to neutralize the threat and restore internal systems to a good enough state. And you also have to use some secondary monitoring to make sure that affected systems are no longer vulnerable. Then we've got recovery. This is when we actually start. So they validate. So they validate that all affected systems are no longer compromised and can be returned to a working condition. We set timelines to fully restore operations, and at that stage it becomes possible to start to calculate the cost of the breach. All of these things. Learning. One of the most important and often overlooked stages. So how do we make sure this doesn't happen again? What do we do in the future to make sure this doesn't happen again? Again, I would say to you, your first steps, if you have cyber insurance, phone your cyber insurance company. They are very, very useful and nice people to talk to sometimes, especially when these things happen. What about a lawyer? Speak to your lawyers. They will be able to help you. Some of them have incident response teams. I was chatting with one earlier on today who is absolutely brilliant, and she really knows her, deals with these things all the time. She's absolutely wonderful. So definitely speak to your lawyer. What about law enforcement? Well, I know that the PSNI like to be made aware of these things, the protect officer especially. And it doesn't need to be reported necessarily as a crime. And sometimes the cyber insurance and the lawyers will not want to report it to the police because they almost lose control in a bit of a way there. But sometimes you should weigh that up with the fact that if you speak to the police, you might be able to stop this from happening to somebody else. Okay, so I think that's a really important thing to be thinking about. Also, I'm willing to bet that the Rickrolling phenomena has done more to prevent folks clicking on unknown links than all cybersecurity combined, all cybersecurity training combined. I wouldn't be surprised. So, social engineering. Well, what is it? Social engineering is a manipulation technique that exploits human error to gain private information, access, or valuables. You can have weaknesses around emails, passwords, trust, and processes. Normally, if we were doing this with a smaller group, we would go off and do a bit of an exercise here and just think about looking at things that have been compromised. If you haven't already come across this site, haveibeenpwned.com, I would definitely recommend checking it out. It's a very useful thing to be aware of. What happens in a social engineering attack? Well, we get deception tactics, urgency tactics, things like that. And what I would also say is that that we have this idea that everyone's going to use these technical issues to get through to us and to break into our infrastructure, whereas there's always an XKCD for this, for things like this. For those of you who work in the tech world, you'll be familiar, I'm sure, with XKCD. But in the imagination, it's let's build $1 million cluster to crack the encryption. And what actually happens? Well, they drug him and hit him with a $5 wrench until they tell us the passwords. Just some examples of phishing. What can we see? So this one here says response required. So they're trying to make sure that people are doing something about it. You can see up here that actually the email address on the left looks pretty good, but then the email on the right is an @outlook.com email, which isn't a good, which is a good example of nonsense. What about this? Well, here's an example of a Microsoft phishing email. So what have we got? Well, we've got all of these here, fake email addresses. It's got a PDF attachment. The invoice is now due. You roll over the link and you get this, an IP address popping up. And yes, we've been telling people this for a long, long time, but things like this still happen. It really is. It does happen rather too frequently. What I'd also say is that the criminals are getting better. This advice here, yes, look at it, yes, follow, yes, be aware of these things. But actually, they're really good now. They use Grammarly to check the grammar on their emails before they send them. They have websites that you click to, and they have an HTTPS. They have a secure certificate associated with them. So it looks like a legitimate page. It has a green tick, which we've always been told means it's secure, etc. Actually, I believe there were figures released for last year, which showed, I think it was something like 55 or 60% of phishing sites used a secure certificate. Okay, that's pretty impressive. That's pretty good. So just be aware of those things. What else can we see? Well, there's a life cycle to this. There's an investigation. There's a hook. There's a play, and then there's an exit. Okay, so there's a whole life cycle that you can see. And this bit here takes a long time. A long, long time. And only when they're 100% sure will they execute the attack. It takes a good while to get used to these, for them to do all their relationship building and all of those sort of bits and pieces. Okay, so being aware of that life cycle is really useful. I'm going to finish up very shortly. What I wanted to do just before I move on, before I do finish up and ask for any questions, is to leave you with 5 tips. Okay, 5 things I would suggest you do before when you've finished here, if you haven't already done so. My first tip is about passwords. So passwords. Use a good password. We've said 8 characters or more, but what the current guidance from the NCSC, the National Cybersecurity Centre in both the UK and Ireland, is about passphrases. Okay, so that's 3 or 4 words all joined together, and that will help you to secure your passwords. It helps when things have to be memorable. When they don't have to be memorable, you don't have to memorize them yourself. Then we can use a different way of doing things, which we'll talk about later on. We'll talk about password managers. Second tip: multi-factor authentication. Wherever offered, use multi-factor authentication is my view. I use it as many places as I can. I have, I think, about 70 multi-factor authentication things on my phone. Multi-factor authentication is essentially saying, here is an email address, here is my email address and password, and here's a code that I have to get off my phone. A 6-digit code normally can come sometimes from SMS if you're not overly worried, or it can come from things like the Google Authenticator app. Okay, it means if your password is compromised, the attacker will be unable to get access without the secondary confirmation on your mobile device. And this is what it looks like. Google Authenticator, download it, scan the wee QR code in your system, and you'll be presented with something like this, where it says what your 6-digit code is that it's asking for. Can be very useful. Definitely in place for administrators. It's very useful for that. Tip number 3, use a password manager. Always, we use LastPass in my office, in my company. I think it's a really good idea. You sometimes get asked questions about, does that mean that you've got one location to get compromised and then you're completely in trouble? Well, yes, kinda. But as long as you've got a good password, you've got two-factor authentication in place for your password manager, then I think that it's a pretty good idea to do. It allows us to share passwords with our teammates. It allows us to have stronger passwords. So my password for Zoom is something ridiculous. I'm not even sure what it is. Like 30, 40, 50 characters. I don't know. I don't need to see it. But use a password manager. It looks something like this. So it provides you with a vault, and on here you can see here's the passwords, and then you can look them up, and it will fill them in automatically for you. Okay, so as I say, we use LastPass, but there are lots and lots of other systems available. Your mileage may vary, but I would suggest using something. Tip 4: protect against phishing. Think about things before you click on them. Be aware of what you're doing. Take some time before you click on that link that you've been sent. I don't know if anyone else is receiving these, but there's a huge amount of those text messages coming in saying you owe us, you owe DLH instead of DHL, £4.36 in postage or something like that. And clicking through takes you to a perfectly legit looking site where all they ask for is your name and date of birth and then your credit card number to pay the bill. But they're scams, and they are always scams. So you've got to be aware of these things. So take a look at those and think before you click. Protecting against malware. A paid-for anti-malware product is one of the best things that you can do. Okay, I think it's really, really important. Go away and have a look and buy one and investigate them and see what you think is right for you. We use Bitdefender in our place. We've also have used Sophos. I use a Mac and I run an antivirus on it, like everybody else in my organization. We all run antivirus on our Macs. Don't think because you're on a Mac you're secure, you're safe. That's not the way it works. There are plenty of nasty bits and pieces out there for OS X for Mac users. So we want to keep our computers updated. We want to think twice before clicking links. Don't download and install non-improved software. Think about your antivirus software, things like that. That's what we want to be doing. And what we're really interested in here as well is the Swiss cheese approach. Okay, so shamelessly looked at from this document here, which is the Swiss cheese approach to the respiratory virus pandemic. Okay, so we've got our personal responsibilities here, which are washing our hands. We make sure that we wear masks if we need to. We physically distance. We stay home if sick and things like that. And then we've got our shared responsibilities. We've got vaccines, quarantine and isolation. And between all of these things, we hope that the virus can't get through. Or if it does, it gets through in a much smaller way. And I'll leave you with a bit of a pun here. I apologise for this. My colleague Keith put this in, and I keep blaming him whenever I do a talk like this. But he always says, don't let attacks go past your eyes with this cheese approach. So in here we have passwords, multi-factor auth, phishing good practice, passwords manager, and antivirus. And the idea is that this red line over here gets blocked. Okay, so it gets blocked by one or more of these, and so it doesn't get through. The likelihood of those holes all lining up should be very, very low. So that's pretty much it. That's all. That's what I am here to talk about today. I'll put my email address up on the screen. I'll also pop it into the chat there. I'd be really interested to hear if you have any questions, any thoughts. Are there any guidance or advice that I can give, or anything that you'd like to know more about, or any of those sort of things. I got somebody. Oh, that's just somebody entering the room. Any questions at all? Please feel free even just to pop something into chat if you'd like. Great stuff. Okay, well, listen, that's brilliant. I will hang around. I'll hang around, and if you do have any questions that you don't want to kind of shout out into the room, then please feel free to stay around, and I'll answer those. If there's any other questions or anything like that, then you also have my email address. Feel free to link in with me on LinkedIn as well. You should be able to find me easily enough on there. Niall Niall can't talk on that, but no problem at all, Niall. Thank you very much for having me along. And listen, I look forward to speaking to you all again soon.
Thanks a million, Simon. It was so informative and so relevant at the minute. So just thanks again, and hopefully we'll have you back soon.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you very much, everybody. See you again soon.
Bye guys.